This is one of those stories I've been sitting on for a really long time. It happened back when I was maybe 27 or 28, way before I got married and way before I had kids. I was a completely different person back then. Not in a bad way, just in the sense that I had the kind of free time and risk tolerance that I genuinely can't relate to anymore. I used to do these solo backpacking trips a few times a year, usually somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. I'd drive out to some remote trailhead, hike deep into the backcountry, way off the trail, and spend a few days completely off the grid. No cell service, no other people, nothing. I loved it. My friends thought I was insane, and honestly, looking back, I kind of was. Let me tell you about 3 trips that changed how I see the wilderness forever. Story 1, the marker trees. This particular trip was in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington State, and it changed how I see backpacking forever. I had been out there for 3 days, and everything had been going perfectly. The weather was great, the trail was quiet, and I hadn't seen another person since the parking lot. That changed on the morning of the 4th day. I woke up around 6:30 a.m., which is pretty standard for me when I'm camping. The sun was just starting to filter through the trees, and everything had that early morning stillness that I love. I unzipped my tent and stepped outside to assess the situation. My campsite looked exactly as I'd left it the night before. Fire pit. Food bag hanging from a tree branch 20 feet away. My boots where I'd left them on a rock to dry. Except for one thing. About 15 feet from my tent, directly in my line of sight when I stepped out, there was a tree that I hadn't noticed before. Or rather, I had noticed the tree. It was a Douglas fir, maybe 40 feet tall, but I hadn't noticed what was on it. Someone had stripped a section of bark off the trunk, about chest height, in a perfect rectangle maybe 2 feet wide and 3 feet tall. The exposed wood underneath was pale and fresh, still damp with sap. This had been done recently. Very recently. I walked over to examine it more closely. The edges of the stripped bark were clean, like it had been peeled away deliberately. And in the center of the exposed wood, someone had carved 3 parallel lines, each about 6 inches long, running vertically down the trunk. I stood there staring at it for a long time, trying to figure out when this could have been done. I'd been at this campsite since yesterday afternoon. I'd built a fire, cooked dinner, sat around until dark, and then gone to sleep around 10 p.m. Had someone done this while I was sleeping? That didn't make sense. The sound of bark being stripped off a tree is loud. I would have heard it. But if they'd done it before I arrived, why hadn't I noticed it when I was setting up camp? I tried to convince myself that I just hadn't seen it. I'd been focused on other things, finding a flat spot for the tent, gathering firewood, setting up my bare hand. It was possible I'd walked right past this tree without noticing the marking. But something about it bothered me. The sap was still wet. Fresh. This had been done in the last few hours, maybe less. I decided to break camp and move on. I didn't like the feeling I was getting. I packed everything up quickly and started hiking. About 2 hours later, I found another one. This one was on a different type of tree, a western red cedar. Same thing, stripped bark in a rectangular patch, 3 parallel vertical lines carved into the exposed wood. I stopped and looked around. The forest was thick here. Dense undergrowth. Low visibility. I couldn't see more than maybe 50 feet in any direction. I kept hiking. Over the next 3 hours, I found 6 more marked trees. All of them following the same pattern. Rectangle of stripped bark. 3 vertical lines. By the 4th tree, I noticed something else. They weren't random. The marked trees formed a line. If you drew a straight line connecting them, it would run perfectly parallel to the direction I was hiking. Someone was marking a path. And that path ran alongside my route. By the 6th tree, I was genuinely spooked. I pulled out my map and tried to figure out where I was. I'd been hiking off trail for most of the morning, navigating by compass and terrain features. According to my best estimate, I was about 8 miles from the nearest trailhead, deep in an area that sees maybe 1 or 2 backpackers a year. Who would be out here marking trees? And why? I decided to change direction. I didn't want to follow this path anymore, didn't want to see where it led. I altered my course to head northwest, away from the marked trees. That's when I found the camp. I came over a small ridge and looked down into a shallow depression maybe 30 yards across. In the center was a campsite. Or what was left of one. There was a tent, or the remains of a tent. The fabric had been shredded, torn into long strips that hung from the frame poles like ribbons. A sleeping bag lay partially unrolled on the ground, also torn open, insulation scattered everywhere. A backpack sat against a tree, empty. Contents strewn around. Clothes. Food bags torn open. A water filter broken in half. And on every tree surrounding the campsite, the same marking. Stripped bark. 3 vertical lines. I didn't enter the site. I stood on that ridge and looked down at it, my heart pounding, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't animal damage. Bears don't shred tents that systematically. And they definitely don't carve marks into trees. I pulled out my phone. No signal, of course. I was too deep. I needed to get out of there. Immediately. I turned and started hiking back the way I'd come, moving as fast as I could with a full pack. I didn't care about being quiet or careful. I just needed distance. I hiked for 4 hours straight, pushing through fatigue and the weight of my gear. I only stopped when I reached a section of trail I recognized, a maintained trail that would lead me back to the trailhead. I followed that trail for another 3 hours until I finally reached the parking lot. It was almost 6 p.m. by that point. I'd been hiking for close to 10 hours. There were 2 other cars in the lot besides mine. I'd never been so relieved to see signs of other people. I loaded my gear into my car and sat in the driver's seat for a long time, just breathing. My hands were shaking. I was completely exhausted. Before I drove away, I reported what I'd found to the ranger station. Gave them my best estimate of the location. Described the destroyed camp and the marked trees. The ranger I spoke to took notes but didn't seem particularly alarmed. He said they'd send someone to check it out, but that vandalism and illegal camping were common issues. He thanked me for reporting it and told me to drive safe. I never heard back from them. I don't know if they found the site. I don't know if they found the person it belonged to. But I think about those marked trees all the time. The precision of them. The pattern. The fact that they'd appeared overnight, surrounding my campsite while I slept. Someone had been out there in those woods with me. Close enough to mark trees all around my camp. Close enough to watch me sleep. And I never saw them. Never heard them. Never knew they were there until morning. I still go camping, but I don't go alone anymore. And I don't go off trail. I stick to maintained campgrounds where there are other people, where rangers patrol, where help is available if something goes wrong. Because I learned something on that trip. The wilderness isn't empty just because you don't see anyone. And sometimes, the scariest thing in the woods is the thing you never see coming. Story 2, the Cairn Trail. My name is Sarah. This happened about 5 years ago when I was 29. I had just gone through a pretty rough breakup and needed to clear my head, so I planned a solo backpacking trip in the Cascade Mountains in Oregon. 5 days, 4 nights, completely alone. I'm an experienced backpacker. I'd been doing overnight trips since college, and I'd done plenty of solo trips before this one. I knew what I was doing. I knew the risks. I was prepared. The trip started normal. I parked at a trailhead off a Forest Service road, shouldered my pack, and started hiking. The plan was to follow a maintained trail for the first day, then branch off onto a less traveled path for the remaining days. Day 1 went perfectly. I covered about 12 miles, set up camp near a creek, had dinner, and fell asleep to the sound of running water. Day 2 was when things started feeling off. I woke up and broke camp like usual. Started hiking around 7 a.m. The trail I was following was narrow and overgrown in places, but it was still clearly marked. Every half mile or so, there'd be a small rock cairn, just a stack of stones marking the path. Cairns are common on trails. Hikers build them to help others find the way, especially in areas where the path isn't obvious. I'd seen hundreds of them over the years. But around midday, I started noticing something weird about these cairns. They were getting bigger. And more frequent. At first, they were the normal size, maybe a foot tall, just 3 or 4 stones stacked on top of each other. But as I continued hiking, they started getting larger. 2 feet tall. 3 feet. By late afternoon, I was passing cairns that were 4 feet tall, made from dozens of stones carefully balanced in increasingly complex arrangements. And they weren't half a mile apart anymore. They were everywhere. Every 50 feet, there'd be another one. Then every 30 feet. Then every 20. I stopped at one of them and just stared. This wasn't normal. These weren't navigational markers anymore. This was something else. The cairns were also getting stranger. Some of them had branches woven between the stones. Others had what looked like symbols scratched into the rocks, lines, circles, patterns I didn't recognize. I checked my map. According to my GPS coordinates, I was still on the right trail. But the trail on the map didn't show any of these cairns. This should have been a barely maintained path used by maybe a handful of people per year. I kept hiking. What else was I going to do? Turn back? I was already 2 days in. The cairns continued. By evening, they were everywhere I looked. 6 feet tall. 8 feet. Some of them looked like they'd taken hours to build. And they were forming patterns now. Lines of cairns branching off the main trail. Circles of cairns surrounding flat areas that might have been campsites. I didn't want to camp near any of them. I pushed on until I found a spot that didn't have any cairns visible from where I'd set up my tent. I was exhausted. I'd hiked 16 miles that day, most of it uphill. I set up camp, ate a cold dinner, didn't want to build a fire, and got in my tent early. It was barely 8 p.m., but I was done with the day. I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing sounds outside. Not animal sounds. These were different. Clicking sounds. Stone on stone. Like someone was building more cairns right outside my tent. I told myself it was just rock settling. Thermal expansion and contraction. Normal sounds that happen in nature. But I didn't believe it. I lay there in my sleeping bag, eyes open, listening. Click. 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 It went on for hours. When I finally fell asleep, I had this dream. I was standing in a forest surrounded by cairns. Thousands of them. They stretched as far as I could see in every direction. And as I watched, they started to move. The stones shifted and rearranged themselves, building taller and taller, reaching toward the sky. I woke up to daylight filtering through my tent. It was morning. I was safe. I unzipped the tent and looked outside. There were new cairns. 3 of them. Arranged in a triangle around my tent. Each one about 5 feet tall. They hadn't been there when I went to sleep. I checked the area thoroughly before setting up camp. Someone had built these during the night. While I was sleeping. Close enough to reach out and touch my tent. I packed up in record time. Didn't eat breakfast. Didn't boil water for coffee. Just stuffed everything in my pack and started hiking. I needed to get out of these woods. The trail continued north, eventually looping back to connect with another trail that would lead me to a different trailhead. I could hitch a ride back to my car from there. But as I hiked, the cairns got worse. They were everywhere now. Massive structures, some of them 10 feet tall, built from hundreds of stones. And they were fresh. Some of them were still being built. I'd round a corner and see a cairn that hadn't been there 2 minutes ago when I'd looked back. It was impossible. No one could build these things that fast. But they were appearing anyway. By midday, I started finding things in the cairns. Personal items. A water bottle. A hiking boot. A compass. A torn piece of fabric that looked like it came from a tent. And then I found the photograph. It was tucked between 2 stones in one of the cairns. A Polaroid, faded and water damaged, but still visible. It showed a woman in hiking gear, smiling at the camera, standing in a forest. Behind her, I could see cairns. Dozens of them. I looked at that photo for a long time. The woman looked happy. Unaware. I kept hiking. That afternoon, I found more photographs. All Polaroids. All showing different people. Men, women, some solo, some in pairs. All smiling. All with cairns in the background. In one photo, I could see a woman building a cairn herself. She was placing a stone on top, carefully balancing it, laughing at the camera. I didn't recognize any of the people. But I recognized the forest. This was the same area I was hiking through right now. I needed to leave. Immediately. I abandoned the trail and started bushwhacking directly east, toward where I knew there was a Forest Service road. I didn't care about staying on the path anymore. I just needed to get out. I hiked for 6 hours, pushing through underbrush and fallen logs, ignoring the pain in my legs and the weight of my pack. The sun was getting low by the time I finally reached the road. I'd never been so happy to see pavement in my life. I walked along the road for about 2 miles before a pickup truck stopped. An older man, probably in his 60s. He asked if I needed help. I told him I needed a ride to the nearest town. He said he was heading that direction anyway. As we drove, he asked where I'd been hiking. I told him the trail name. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You see the cairns?" I looked at him. Yeah. There were a lot of them. He nodded. People have been reporting those for years. Started showing up maybe 10 years ago. No one knows who's building them. Are there a lot of them? Hundreds. Maybe thousands by now. They keep finding more. Have they ever found the person building them? He shook his head. No. Rangers have tried. Set up cameras. Hiked in to stake out areas where new ones appear. Never caught anyone. What about the photographs? The ones in the cairns? He gave me a look. What photographs? I found Polaroids, tucked into some of the cairns. Pictures of hikers. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "They don't tell people about those. Don't want to scare anyone away from the trails." "How many have they found?" 40 something. Last I heard. "Have they identified the people in the photos?" He pulled over to the side of the road and put the truck in park. Then he turned to look at me. "Yeah," he said. "They've identified some of them. About 15. And? They're all missing persons. People who disappeared hiking in these mountains over the last 10 years. I felt my stomach drop. Every single person in those photographs never made it home. Story 3, The Window Camp. I go camping alone several times a year. I've been doing it since my mid-20s, and at this point, I'm 38, so we're talking close to 15 years of solo trips. I know the risks, which is why I always carry a firearm and why I'm very careful about where I camp and how I prepare. This happened about 18 months ago in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. It's a massive forest, over 900,000 acres, and if you know where to go, you can hike for a week without seeing another person. I had planned a 4-day, 3-night trip. I parked at a remote trailhead and started hiking around 9 a.m. The plan was simple: follow the trail for about 10 miles, then set up camp, spend a couple days exploring the area, and hike back out. The first day was perfect. The weather was clear, the trail was well maintained, and I made good time. By 4 p.m., I'd covered the 10 miles and found a good spot to camp, a flat area near a creek, sheltered by trees, with good drainage. I set up my tent, gathered firewood, and had a fire going by 6 p.m. I cooked dinner, cleaned up, and sat by the fire until it burned down to coals. By 10 p.m., I was in my tent, in my sleeping bag, starting to drift off. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Outside my tent. Not animal footsteps, human footsteps. Boots on leaves and twigs. I sat up immediately, wide awake. My pistol was in my pack, right next to me. I grabbed it and pointed it at the tent door. The footsteps circled my tent. Slowly. Deliberately. Whoever it was wasn't trying to be quiet. They wanted me to know they were there. I called out. "I can hear you. I'm armed. Identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. Silence. I waited, heart pounding, gun aimed at the door. After maybe 30 seconds, the footsteps resumed. But now they were walking away. I could hear them getting fainter, moving into the woods. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat there with my gun in my hand, listening, waiting for them to come back. When morning came, I got out of my tent to look around. I found footprints. Boot prints. They circled my tent completely, maybe 10 feet away in a perfect circle. But here's what didn't make sense. The prints came from the direction of the creek, circled my tent, and then went back to the creek. But they didn't continue anywhere. They just stopped. I followed them to the creek bank. The last print was right at the water's edge. And then nothing. Like whoever made them had walked into the water and disappeared. I should have left right then. Packed up and hiked back to my car. But I'd driven 6 hours to get here, and I'd planned this trip for months. Part of me wanted to believe it was just another hiker who'd gotten lost, wandered into my camp, and then left. So I stayed. I spent the day hiking around the area, exploring. I didn't see anyone. No other campsites. No signs of other people. That evening, I made dinner, built another fire, and tried to relax. But I kept thinking about those footsteps. The perfect circle around my tent. The prints that led to the creek and then vanished. I went to bed around 10 p.m. again. This time, I kept my pistol in my hand inside the sleeping bag. Around midnight, I heard them again. Footsteps. Same pattern. Circling my tent. I didn't call out this time. I just listened. They completed one full circle, then stopped. Right outside my tent door. I could hear breathing. Heavy. Like someone who'd been walking for a long time. Then a voice. Male. Low. Raspy. "I see you." My blood went cold. The footsteps resumed, completing another circle, and then walked away toward the creek again. I stayed in my tent until dawn. When I finally got the courage to look outside, I found more footprints. Same pattern as the night before. Circle around the tent. Walk to the creek. Stop. But this time, there was something else. On a tree about 20 feet from my tent, carved into the bark, "I see you." I packed up my camp in less than 10 minutes. I didn't care about organization. I just stuffed everything in my pack and started hiking. I wasn't going back to the trailhead. That was 10 miles away. Instead, I hiked directly toward where I knew there was a Forest Service road, about 4 miles through dense forest. I made it maybe half a mile before I found the camp. It wasn't a normal campsite. It was a structure. Someone had built a shelter using branches and logs, camouflaged with leaves and forest debris. It was maybe 8 feet by 8 feet, built against a rock outcropping. And on one side, facing the direction of my campsite, there was an opening. A window. I stood there staring at it, understanding flooding through me. Someone had built a hide. A hunting blind. Positioned to watch my campsite. I stepped closer and looked inside. There was a sleeping bag. A backpack. Food wrappers. Water bottles. A notebook. I picked up the notebook and opened it. Pages and pages of writing. Dates. Times. Descriptions. July 15th, 2:30 p.m. Solo male hiker, early 30s, blue tent, set up camp near creek. July 16th, 9 a.m., target departed. Camp abandoned. August 3rd, 5 p.m., couple, late 20s, red tent, set up camp east side of clearing. August the 4th, 11 p.m., approached camp. Target aware. Departed. There were dozens of entries. Different campers. Different dates. All describing people setting up camp in the area, and then notes about approaching them at night. And then I found the most recent entry. September 18th, 4 p.m., solo male, late 30s, green tent, camp near creek. Good site. Clear approach. We'll visit tonight. That was yesterday. That was me. I dropped the notebook and backed away from the shelter. I needed to leave. Immediately. I turned to run and almost collided with someone standing directly behind me. A man. Probably in his 40s. Filthy clothes. Long beard. Wild eyes. We stared at each other for a second. Then he smiled. "You found my camp," he said. I didn't respond. I just ran. He chased me. I could hear him crashing through the underbrush behind me, but I didn't look back. I just ran as fast as I could with a full pack. I don't know how long I ran. Maybe 20 minutes. Maybe longer. But eventually, I didn't hear him anymore. I stopped to catch my breath and listen. Nothing. Just forest sounds. I kept moving, more carefully now, trying to navigate toward the Forest Service road. It took me 3 more hours, but I finally made it. I flagged down the first vehicle I saw, a ranger truck. I told the ranger everything. He radioed it in and followed me back to the area where I'd found the shelter. But when we got there, it was gone. No shelter. No notebook. No sleeping bag. Just forest. The ranger looked at me like I was crazy. But then we found my campsite. And we found the tree with ICU carved into it. He called in more rangers. They searched the area for 2 days. Never found the man. Never found the shelter. Never found any evidence that anyone else had been there. But they did find something. About a mile from where I'd been camping, they found a grave. Shallow. Partially exposed. Recent. They excavated it and found human remains. A hiker who'd been reported missing 6 months earlier. The case is still open. They never caught the person responsible. But I know what I saw. I know who carved those words into that tree. And I know that somewhere in those woods, there's a man who watches campers. Who approaches them at night. Who marks trees to let them know he's there. And sometimes, the campers don't make it home. I still go camping. But I'll never camp alone again. Ever.